Okay, who's good and who's bad in our politics? Good, bad? It actually more depends on who's progressive and who's conservative. Wilkow starts now. Welcome to the program. I'm Andrew Wilkow. Now, if you follow my radio show or you've been watching this program for any length of time, you know about what I like to call the Wilkow Guide to Two-Way Media Perception. See, that's when the media covers Republicans and Democrats in basically the same situation or with the same attributes, but portrays them completely opposite. So, for example, when dealing with both a Democrat and Republican who both went to, let's say, Harvard Law School, the Democrat is treated to high honor, while the Republican, not so much. Think Barack Obama versus Ted Cruz. And we see this all over the place. If a conservative woman, let's say, is beautiful, she's portrayed as empty-headed. But a beautiful progressive woman is seen as a trendsetter, or even better, held up as an example. But a not-so-attractive woman who's also a Democrat would be seen as too intellectual to be concerned with such shallowness. But a not-so-attractive Republican woman would be just ugly. Get it? This dynamic is on full display in the coverage of Republican versus Democrat governors and even presidents, but most specifically, Andrew Cuomo of New York versus Greg Abbott of Texas. Now, the media loves Cuomo, despite the deadly consequences of his nursing home scheme. And there's so much to cover here. We're not even going to have time to get into this new sexual harassment allegation. I mean, we're not going to hear all about Kavanaugh and her truth and all that stuff, right? The media's not going to hold it against him. But the media right now is pounding Greg Abbott over the massive power outage in Texas, blaming him and Republicans 100%. They did this as fast as the lights went out, and they continue even though the power's already back on. They're also building up Joe Biden as the hero as he traveled to Texas to survey the damage. Did I mention the power's already back on? Until about 5 minutes ago, the media was oohing and ahhing over Cuomo, hanging on his every word, no matter how self-indulgent, during his China virus press conferences, all the while blaming Donald Trump for everything. CNN went so far as to lift its ban on Chris Cuomo interviewing his big brother. We'll get to CNN in just a minute. Here we are. We're about the 1-year mark of the China virus pandemic. And in the beginning, let's be honest, we didn't know a whole lot and relied on the so-called experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci. But we've learned a lot since then. No thanks to Fauci. But even in the early days, we knew the elderly were the most vulnerable. On March 25th, 2020, Andrew Cuomo issued this executive order that says, quote, "No resident shall be denied readmission or admission to the nursing home solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19. Nursing homes are prohibited from requiring a hospitalized resident who is determined medically stable to be tested for COVID-19 prior to admission or readmission." The media never reported on this executive order. On April 3rd of 2020, Governor Cuomo signed the state budget. It included a provision inserted by Cuomo himself. Quote, "Less than 2 years after that flood of cash from the Greater New York Hospital Association, Cuomo signed legislation last month quietly shielding hospital and nursing home executives from the threat of lawsuits stemming from the coronavirus outbreak. The provision, inserted into an annual budget bill by Cuomo's aides, created one of the nation's most explicit immunity protections for healthcare industry officials, according to legal experts." That was from far-left writer David Serrata for The Guardian. The death toll began to soar. So what did the media do? They gushed over Cuomo, never practicing actual journalism, investigative or otherwise, never once dealt in fact. Yeah, for months, the media, led by CNN, looked the other way as we were treated to the Cuomo Bro Show.
There's only one company in the entire country that makes these up in Maine. All right, here's the swab. Is it true that this was the swab that the nurse was actually using on you, and that at first it went into your nose and disappeared, so that in scale, this was the actual swab that was being used to fit up that double-barrel shotgun that you have mounted on the front of your pretty face?
Well, by now you've all seen this headline: Cuomo aide Melissa DeRosa admits they hid nursing home data so feds wouldn't find out. Quote, the stunning admission of a cover-up was made by Secretary to the Governor Melissa DeRosa during a video conference call with state Democratic leaders, in which she said the Cuomo administration had rebuffed a legislative request for the tally in August because right around the same time, then President Donald Trump turns this into a giant political football, according to an audio recording of the 2-hour-plus meeting. Well, then the left-wing ladder-climbing state attorney general got involved. Quote, a bombshell report from New York Attorney General Tish James accused Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration of undercounting COVID-19 nursing home deaths by up to 50%. Cuomo wrote a book about his coronavirus response and won an International Emmy Award for his daily briefings, touting his self-proclaimed just the facts approach to the pandemic in an ongoing victory lap. I almost forgot. In all of this, Cuomo had the time to write a book telling the rest of us just how awesome he is. And he even won an Emmy for it. An Emmy. Back to CNN. They're journalists over there at CNN, right through and through. They're not going to let familial associations or Democratic politics get in the way of their pristine product, right? Because this is CNN.
There was deliberate confusion. There was information that was not conveyed clearly. There was a misrepresentation of the situation that was going on. And it was, tragically unnecessary. The most important thing is that the policy changed fairly quickly. The governor made a mistake. The state health department, they issued an order that in the early hectic days of the pandemic, what might have seemed reasonable but did not work out well. The fact that we've had a number of deaths that were then merged or portrayed in a way that was confusing made it hard to perceive exactly what was going on. And that's just not right. So this is not a cover-up in the sense that people were fired or files were destroyed or anything like that. The information was out there, or at least the administration had it. They just refused to tell the public what it had a right to know.
Refusing to tell the public what a right... That's not a cover-up? No cover-up? So the death toll was made public. It was accurate? Well, how about the fact-checking?
Do you think Cuomo's been given an easy break by the media, and is that changing?
I think the situation in New York is really complicated. Certainly, there are things to criticize about how the Cuomo administration handled data.
What's complicated about fact-checking? If you haven't noticed, ever since Biden became president, the resident on-air fact-checkers are now off-air. And as soon as this story broke, CNN's top guy, Jeff Zucker, reimposed the ban on the Cuomo Bro Show. Not only is baby brother not allowed to interview big brother, CNN has even blacked out all coverage of the governor in his time slot. Blackout. It's a little foreshadowing there. But here's baby brother.
500,000 are gone, and many were not inevitable. These deaths came because of how we denied the reality in this country.
So let's ask the big question here. Does President Biden still think Andrew Cuomo is the gold standard?
Does President Biden still consider Andrew Cuomo the gold standard when it comes to leadership on the pandemic?
Well, John, we work with Governor Cuomo just like we work with governors across the country. He's also chair of the NGA, so he plays an important role in ensuring that we're coordinating closely and getting assistance out to people of his state and to states across the country. And we'll continue to do that. And there, of course, will be a process. The investigations will leave that to others to determine, the appropriate law enforcement authorities to determine how that path is going to move as we look forward.
I love the pause there. I guess you'll have to circle back on that one. So even in the face of facts being public concerning Andrew Cuomo's responsibility for the death toll among New York's elderly, the media, led by CNN, can't even bring themselves to blame anyone but Trump. And let's be clear, Donald Trump had absolutely nothing to do with this. Now on to Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Democrats in the coastal blue states and Democrats in the media already despise Texas. You know, for its low taxes and limited government. It stands as living proof that you don't need to tax and regulate people to death. And for as long as we can remember, Democrats have been trying to flip Texas blue. There's even an organization called Battleground Texas. And as soon as the lights went off on February 16th, they started screaming about deregulation. The left can't just get over the fact that Texas set up its own independent power grid to avoid federal regulation during FDR's term. Now, the modern Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, was founded in 1970. For all the talk that Texas was warned, Texas rarely experiences harsh, cold temperatures, let alone ice storms. But the media, led by CNN, began blaming Governor Greg Abbott.
It's all the windmills' fault, Governor Greg Abbott says, not missing the chance to spin a yarn for political gain in the middle of a crisis. He blames renewable energy for the rolling power outages that have Texans seeking refuge in their cars as the temperatures in their homes drop into the 40s. But he's wrong.
There's also Don Lemon, huge defender of the Green New Deal. He blames Abbott for just not getting on board.
Only in 2021 could we be told that in a state rich in energy, this is Texas, right, oil country, that the root of the problem is wind or solar.
So it's a double whammy. The media has Texas in its sights. Truth be damned. They know Texas is bad because it's run on conservative principles, and Texas is making the blue states look bad. But they got him. This is it. They got him. Texas will turn against Abbott. This will turn that awful oil profit state into one giant windmill farm. Hold on. The same media that chose to ignore Andrew Cuomo's executive order for months has also chosen to ignore an order from the Department of Energy. What? Yeah, Democrats and the media claim that the Texas grid is totally deregulated, that what's needed is federal regulatory oversight. Those redneck conservatives can't just do as they please. Well, quote, ERCOT requests that the secretary issue an order immediately, effective February 14th, 2021 through February 19th, 2021, given the emergency nature of the expected load stress. The responsibility of ERCOT to ensure maximum reliability on a system and the ability of ERCOT to identify and dispatch generation necessary to meet the additional load, I have determined that the additional dispatch of specified resources is necessary to best meet the emergency and serve the public interest. FPA Section 202 requires the Secretary of Energy to ensure that any 202 order that may result in a conflict with a requirement of any environmental law be limited to the hours necessary to meet the emergency and serve the public interest, and to the maximum extent practicable, be consistent with any applicable environmental law, and minimize any adverse environmental impacts, unquote. So how do the media and the Democrats blame Abbott when Texas, in the end, does have to follow guidelines from the federal government? You just don't report on it or something. Did I mention the power's back on already? But those elderly people in New York State, they're all still dead. The narrative here is Texas and the red states are terrible, awful, no good. But New York and the blue states, well, they're righteous, moral, and fair. Let me throw out some numbers. Headline: Even before COVID, 2,600 people a week were leaving New York City. So let's look at New York under Cuomo and the Democrats, right? Quote, New York's population decline has been building up before COVID, said Justin Hollander, a professor of urban and environmental policy and planning at Tufts University in Massachusetts. It will certainly accelerate as preferences for low-density environments drives populations, unquote. Well, what's the tax rate in New York? It's a lot of taxes. Now on to Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the Republicans. Headline, Texas added more residents than any other U.S. state in the past year. Yes, everything is bigger in Texas, including population growth. From mid-2018 to mid-2019, the Lone Star State added more residents than any other state, according to estimates from the U.S. Census Bureau. Here's another one. Texas accounted for nearly 1/4 of the country's population growth from 2018 to 2019, about a little over 1.5 million people in that time. And there were 10 states that lost population, including Illinois, New Jersey, and New York. So what's the tax rate in Texas? Boom! There it is. Zero. Zero taxes in Texas. So here's the argument. The Wilkow Guide to Two-Way Media Perception is real. It's a thing. The elitist left-wing media creates heroes and villains based on their preferred politics, not the truth, even when dealing with similar situations and attributes. It's progressive good, conservative bad, even when facts come out. Even when the facts come out, outlets like CNN, they never change their narratives. They just dump them and move on to creating the next narrative. Here's a simple question. If New York and Cuomo are good and Texas and Abbott are bad, why are people fleeing New York and Cuomo in droves to red states like Texas? Well, the answer's pretty simple. People are fleeing progressive policies and big regulations because they aren't working. No matter how the media spins it, big government states do not provide an extra layer of safety. It's quite the opposite. Pages of regulations and armies of bureaucrats cannot shield all of humanity from a once-in-a-lifetime event. But they sure as hell can make it worse, and they do. Andrew Cuomo is not to blame for the China virus. He is, however, to blame for the idiotic and arrogant executive orders and regulations that he alone pursued. Yet, he was portrayed as the hero. Trump sent in the Navy, the National Guard, and truckloads of supplies, including those never-used ventilators. For that, he was the villain. Cuomo is to blame for New York's failures under progressive leadership. Greg Abbott is not to blame for the power outage, but he is to be credited with a state that is booming under conservative leadership. Once again, if I haven't said it enough, the power's back on. Texas is growing, but Abbott is the villain. Now, President Biden, he got to fly in with some relief, and unlike Trump, he gets to be the hero. Unlike the media, I just gave you all the facts. All right, joining me now is a guy who's had his own clash with baby brother, my friend and former Trump 2020 comms director, Tim Murtaugh. Welcome to the program. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Good to be with you again, Andrew.
You know,
no see.
Being honest, you were on my radio show so much during the campaign, you could have been the co-host.
Well, I mean, you were always so gracious to have us on and share some of your time with us on the Trump campaign, and we very much appreciated it. Helped us get our message out, and helped us, I think, try to cut through what we were hearing and what most Americans would hear from the mainstream media. And you know, having avenues like your show on the radio and here to try to tell people what's really going on in current events and all that. It was very, very, very helpful, and I think a service to the voters.
All right, before we get into this whole media two-way perception thing, I want to play the clip of you sparring with baby brother specifically. Go ahead and roll that.
Yeah. You had your brother on for the Cuomo Brothers Comedy Hour. They're joking about the size of the Q-tip that you would need for his nose to get a test.
It was funny as hell.
Does this sound like somebody who was taking it very seriously?
Tim, you want to talk about my brother because you are coming from a place of weakness. You are in the middle of a pandemic.
No, I want to talk about people turning COVID and the coronavirus crisis into a political weapon, which is what CNN does all day long.
First of all, the holding up the picture, that was awesome. Like, that's one of those things I wish I thought of. You literally held up the picture of Chris and Andrew Cuomo doing what we call the Cuomo Bro Show. But you know what's really shocking and disgusting about the media is none of them reported on the executive order by Andrew Cuomo that led to that massive death toll in the nursing homes that the Cuomo administration covered up all this time. And you were right to point this out to Chris Cuomo. They were doing this show at night between the two of them and not practicing real journalism.
No, they weren't. And what I said in that clip is called it the Cuomo Brothers Comedy Hour, the Cuomo Brothers Power Hour, some people call it. I mean, it was clearly a joke. It was obliterating the lines between journalism and, I think, obvious coziness between journalists and the newsmakers. And what we now know is that the state of New York and Governor Cuomo were covering up the deaths from COVID in nursing homes by as much as 50%. And we had all over CNN 24 hours a day, just a love fest with Governor Cuomo and treating him like the gold standard, which is actually what Joe Biden called him in as far as the response to the COVID crisis goes. And now we know it was a disaster. And they were, in fact, covering up the deaths from COVID in nursing homes. And I mean, it's really remarkable that a guy like Governor Cuomo would actually write a book about leadership during the coronavirus crisis and how to chart the road through the coronavirus crisis when he was lying and covering up the deaths from nursing homes. And one more thing about CNN and Chris Cuomo and his brother, the governor. I never heard about this rule that CNN supposedly had where Chris Cuomo wasn't allowed to interview his brother because of some sort of ethical agreement. Supposedly that was lifted during the coronavirus crisis because they said it was, quote, an extraordinary time. Well, now, conveniently, they've put the supposed rule back in place. So Chris Cuomo is no longer allowed to interview his brother, the governor. And what a miracle. It happens at a time when Cuomo is going through a series of scandals in Albany, and conveniently, his brother is not allowed to have him on his show to ask about that. And so, you know, it's obvious what the standards were there, and they weren't very high.
The executive order was public. It wasn't like some, op research by Republicans. That was out there for anyone to see. But what they did night after night was blame Donald Trump. Now, look, you're the comms director. You've got the battle scars and bruises from dealing with the media. But on this issue, they blame Trump, who gave them the Navy, sent in the National Guard, sent in resources, including those ventilators that Andrew Cuomo said if he didn't have, everyone was going to die. Trump supporters at Samaritan's Purse set up a temporary hospital in Central Park. But night after night after night, instead of covering what the governor did, what he actually did for all to see, they said it's Trump who's to blame. Now you have Jake Tapper and a few of them trying to cover this, but they're not covering it with the outrage that they had for Trump, about 9 months ago, 10 months ago. And yeah, they put the ban back in place, but not only have they put the ban back in place, they've blacked out all coverage of Cuomo during Cuomo primetime.
Right, which is not how it used to be. And you see what's happening here. They ignored what was obvious to everybody, which was the nursing home scandal. And you're right, the executive order that was there for everyone to see. And of course, for a while, Governor Cuomo denied that he had anything to do with it. But the media at large really has no choice now but to cover this story because Democrats have turned on Governor Cuomo. You see, when AOC puts out a statement saying that it needs to be investigated, and when you have Assemblyman Ron Kim, I think his name is, saying that he was the subject of Cuomo bullying and saying that it's a good time to start impeachment proceedings against Governor Cuomo. When Democrats come out and do that, it then gives CNN and others permission, which is what they were always looking for, permission to criticize Governor Cuomo. Because you're right, they had set him up as sort of the anti-Trump. And the way they treated Governor Cuomo as though he was the savior during the coronavirus crisis versus take a look at how they treated Governor DeSantis in Florida, a governor who was actually handling the crisis, keeping his residents safe, which has a massively high senior citizens population, and he's been doing it right. And guess what? Florida has been largely open as a society and as an economy throughout much of the coronavirus crisis. And the numbers in Florida are far, far better than they are in New York, despite them having similar populations and despite the media's love for Governor Cuomo and their absolute hatred for Ron DeSantis. And what's the common denominator here? It was Donald Trump. Donald Trump is what CNN hated. They had to go after him all day long. Governor Cuomo was a convenient savior to put up as the anti-Trump. DeSantis, they align with Trump, so they hate him, of course. And it's pretty obvious what was going on the whole time for anyone who was watching. But you know, if you follow Twitter, where you have all the anti-Trump crowd on there, you hear a lot of people who are just trumpeting and amplifying what CNN was up to. But we knew what it was all along, and we tried to make the point that you're right. You mentioned the ventilators. Governor Cuomo said that there was going to be a shortage of about 40,000 ventilators. I think he said. But what President Trump did was marshal the unprecedented scale of the public sector and the private sector to create all the equipment that we needed, the PPE, masks and gowns and gloves, and the ventilators. And no one in this country, not in New York, not in California, not in Michigan, not in Florida, not anywhere else, no one in this country died from lack of access to a ventilator because of the unprecedented effort that President Trump put forward. And that shortage in New York of ventilators that we heard about, that Governor Cuomo said was impending and it was about to happen, it never materialized. And CNN just brushes that under. If you watch that entire segment that I did right there, you'll hear Chris Cuomo say, yeah, okay, he did accomplish that. And then he wants to move on because it's not convenient to their narrative.
But it's more than Trump. It's bigger than Trump. They do this across the board, right? It's conservative, bad, progressive, good, no matter what the facts of the story are. We see this in Texas, right? The media, led by CNN, has been pounding Greg Abbott. The power's back on. Right? You know, they have been trying to come at conservatives. Well, this is deregulation. This is what happens when you have low taxes. This is the failure of limited government. It's a once in a lifetime ice storm. I'm not saying that everything was handled wonderfully, but stuff does happen, for lack of a better word, and they're blaming Abbott like he wanted this to happen. But even bigger than Abbott versus Cuomo or Trump versus Biden, this is what the media, you know, we've been screaming about this as conservatives and Republicans for generations, but I don't know how much more laid bare it could possibly be for the average person, that the media has decided who the enemy and who the ally is, who the hero and the villain is, based on their preferred politics. I mean, when you look at Cuomo, I got to be honest with you, he's everything they accuse Trump of being.
Oh, he is. He's a bully, and he uses his authority. And we see this latest scandal being accused by a former New York governor's office staffer of sexual harassment. He is absolutely all the things that the media accuses Republicans of being. Just look at the disparate coverage of what happened in Texas versus the rolling blackouts that go on as a matter of course in California. In Texas, as you said, a once-in-a-lifetime, once in several centuries storm, which caused widespread power outages, okay? Compare that to what goes on in California routinely with their unreliable power grid and the rolling blackouts out there, and they never look at California's generations-long Democrat leadership, their current governor, Newsom, and say, hey, what are you guys doing in California? This is a disaster. No, no, no. They would rather, and the media, when it's in Texas, for example, which everyone knows is a red state, despite the fever dreams of the media and Democrats hoping to turn it blue one day, they look at that, and you can sense the glee in the media that they get to pick on Texas and look what's happening to Texas. And then they find the boogeyman. And of course, it's Governor Abbott, or it might be Senator Cruz. And look at the explosion of media coverage over Ted Cruz, wildly out of proportion for the coverage that a scandal with Governor Cuomo in New York, with actual people dying in nursing homes and then lying about it. The comparison of the breathless media coverage is right there for everyone to see.
Yeah, and it's it's toxic corruption. It really is. That's the only way I can describe it. It's toxic corruption. As soon as the media fears that their coverage may come to harm the Democrat agenda, look, there's two ways to cover these things. There's the endless outrage, right? You see them seating the experts and the pundits and the activists around their glass tables with their network logo coffee mugs, and they pound the outrage like Brett Kavanaugh, right? It was her truth. This was about Republicans and women. It went on for weeks. It went on for months. But with Cuomo, they'll cover it, but they won't drive the anger, the animosity. They won't make it divisive. And that's the way they deal with these things. They'll check the box and they'll move on. They'll write a couple stories, but we're not going to hear about Lindsey Boylan's truth and all this stuff. We're not going to get that. So when it's Republicans, it's the outrage news cycle. When it's Democrats, it's just a little coverage.
Yeah, and this is a trick that I know that people have seen before. Rather than covering the actual news and what the story is, like the scandal, whether it's the nursing homes or now these allegations against Governor Cuomo, rather than covering what the actual news item is, they will wait a day or so. And CNN had a 24-hour blackout before they reported on anything regarding these sexual harassment allegations against Governor Cuomo. They'll wait a day or so. And then the way that they first report on the story is how Republicans are reacting to it. So if you're a CNN viewer, the first time you hear about anything is when they tell you that Republicans have pounced or Republicans are seizing or, Republicans are outraged. They never tell you the initial story. It's always Republicans pouncing that you hear about. And that's a common trick. It's not just CNN that does that.
You've been around the block on this one. I got to leave it there. Tim Murtaugh, we're going to get you back on this. I'm going to be bothering you. I'm going to be bothering you to come back on the program and talk about this stuff. Tim Murtaugh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Always a pleasure.
On a side note, it's nice, and I got to be honest, somewhat scary, to finally see the Democrats acknowledging that Joe Biden really has no business being president. Sure, they wanted to get rid of Orange Man Bad. They wanted him out, and they felt like nominating Biden was their best chance to do that. But now that we've entered the practical realm of actually governing, they're forced to admit that he's just not all there. The Democrats, they want to keep him on a short leash for his own safety and basically everyone else's. Headline, Daily Caller. Democrats ask Biden to surrender keys on nuclear launches. Who knows what he'll blow up if he's left to his own devices instead of, ordering Uber Eats or Geritol from Amazon. He might just nuke the White House by accident. But at least he also seems to recognize that he's a danger to himself from time to time. Quote, no president has entered the White House with as clear a focus on Alzheimer's as Joe Biden. Well, yeah, I guess it's called self-preservation. Look, Joe, I'm sorry, but we've just got to face the facts. Nobody actually wanted you in the White House. You were just the Trojan horse for the Democrats to regain power. The person they really want has an office down the hall, and you can bet they don't even try to keep her on a leash. Okay, with so much Texas in the news, I wanted to bring on a local to look at what's going on. Congressman Chip Roy of Texas's 21st District, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great to be with you. We got a lot going on in Texas right now.
Yes, we do. And look, the power's back on, thank God, right? But the media has been just pummeling Greg Abbott and the state, especially conservatives. One myth I want to get rid of right here and now. We keep hearing deregulation, deregulation, deregulation. There's a difference between Texas having its own regulations and being completely free of federal regulations. We just went over the Department of Energy's order that allowed ERCOT to raise power output leading up to the massive power failure, mostly blamed on green energy. But how could the media and the Democrats say that Texas doesn't have any regulations if ERCOT had to go to the Department of Energy to raise output? That's regulations.
Well, that's a great question. I will say, yeah, there's a lot of Texans, and there's a few still hurting. In the western part of my district who don't have power, they're trying to get back up, but that's just a product of ice knocking lines down. And we're out getting water out to them and trying to help them out as Texans do. But on the policy front, yeah, you're absolutely right. The left is trying to jump on this, right? Like never let a good crisis go to waste. When it is their policies that are driving the real problem here, the root of the problem. The problem in Texas fundamentally was a lack of a reliable base load. Now, that is a fault of Texas, and we should make sure we do a better job. 20 years ago, when our entire grid was fueled by predominantly coal and nuclear, you had a really predictable baseload. Then we added a lot of natural gas, which, of course, is cheaper, drives prices down, it's abundant, and it drives CO2 levels down. That's great. And during the summer months, we've been able to make that work. But we need to do a better job winterizing those, and we need to do a better job not relying on wind, and there's too much wind in the pipeline, and keeping in mind the federal regulations that drive all of these decisions, right? It is federal regulations that is making it much more difficult for coal and nuclear plants to be able to be relied upon nationwide, which are the backbone of a true reliable baseload for grids.
Okay, so we're going to get rid of this myth that Texas is just completely deregulated, right?
Right.
So Texas, even if it has its own grid, still has to answer to federal regulations. And you do have an oversight board called ERCOT. It's not like anybody could just put up whatever they want and derive energy from it. There are regulations in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. There are regulations, there are federal regulations, the state regulations. It always reminds me, I debate leftists on healthcare reform, and they talk about, quote, the wild, wild west before Obamacare, as if in 2008, healthcare wasn't highly regulated by UMRA and HIPAA and EMTALA and all these ridiculous federal regulations. That's the way they frame it. They try to make it like there's a bunch of cowboys running around just saying, well, I hope your electricity shows up. Texas had a very powerful, reliable grid for years. And over the last decade in particular, we've led the nation in having really low, abundant power, driving CO2 levels down, attracting businesses, creating jobs. Everybody forgets all of the great things that come when you've got clean, abundant energy. And now they want to come in and say, oh, you have this wild, wild west. We need to come over and take it over and insert FERC. Not true. Highly regulated environment, both federally and at the state level. What we need to do is just a few simple things. Make sure you've got baseload. Have that there, coal, nuclear, and gas that's got a little bit more winterization. Winterize that gas, and then just make sure there's a little extra capacity in the market and a little better planning when you've got an event like we got. But that's like a once-in-a-lifetime event.
While I got you, I want to get onto some other topics. Joe Biden and the nuclear football, since you brought up nuclear energy. Do we not trust Joe Biden with the nuclear football? What is going on? I thought he was sharp as a tack, ready to go, ready to lead. He's out there saying, well, we not everybody comes into the office ready to lead. You've been there since 1973. You've been vice president for 8 years. What do you mean? What is this?
Well, look, the vice president, or I should say President Biden, is making very clear to the American people what we were all saying last year during the campaign. I mean, he's just literally not ready to be in that office. He's weak. He's allowing his radical left to drive the agenda. And I think a weak presidency, allowing that radical left to do that is damaging to the country. We saw that yesterday with the Equality Act and a whole bunch of other things. It reminds me of a joke talking about the nuclear football. And Dennis Miller, I remember back when Reagan was president, and he said, man, Reagan is 77 years old and he's got his finger on the nuclear button. He goes, like, my grandfather's 77 and we won't even let him use the remote control to the TV, right? I mean, this is where we got Joe Biden, and he is not very sharp. And this is I think the American people are going to see that, and it's concerning when you've got Kamala Harris as the person waiting in the wings.
You read my mind, because I was going to go to the Equality Act next. Republicans, and this kind of circles back to energy, we're always told we hate science. I love science. Show me the science of this transgender science stuff, because I don't see it. To the best of my knowledge, we are XX or XY. Other than that, I don't know what they're talking about. But now we have to adhere to this new woke standard of everybody is who and what they say they are, regardless of biology.
No, you're exactly right. And for those listeners who don't know, the Equality Act was put on the floor and voted on yesterday. It was passed on pretty much party lines. And it's a leftist power grab. It is a dream for liberals who want to be able to say that Washington, D.C. is going to decide what you think. That's literally what this is about. My wife and I are products of the public education system, K through law school. But we send our kids to a private Christian school. And it's a struggle for us to do it, but we do it. We do it for one reason. We want them to learn the values that we think are important, Western civilization, that there is a God, that there is a man, that there is a woman, and that they are different. We want them to be around people who share those values. Radical leftist liberals, through this legislation, don't want that to exist. They want to cleanse the public square of ideology. This is a power grab and nothing more. This is not about equality. This is about making you bow down to the altar of the cultural elites in Washington, D.C. and basically adopt whatever they tell you you must adopt. And that's why we must fight it. And Joe Manchin needs to be held accountable. West Virginians, call Joe Manchin. You don't believe in the Equality Act.
Well, look, Joe Manchin has been, I got to be honest with you, quite reasonable on some of these issues. And I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I want to go one step further with this. Whether it's so-called anti-racism school curriculums or this, I always say this is not about being fairer to people who are transgender. This is about submission. This is about forcing the population to see something that they don't necessarily agree with. It's not about whether or not transgender people should not be beaten up in the streets. That goes without saying. Anti-racism has nothing to do with telling your children that racism is wrong. We do that already. Anti-racism is a promotion of socialism. It's getting you to submit to something where there's 10 stacks behind it. And that's exactly what this Equality Act does. It does it to people of faith. It does it to people of conscience. It does it to people of science, quite frankly. I mean, we're upending our understanding of our human bodies.
Well, thank you for framing it that way. That's so important. Too many of my colleagues just kind of retreat, even myself, we retreat a little bit to the faith corner. We just say, well, this is an attack on our religious liberty. That is true. And for those of us who are members of the faith community, it is an attack on our belief system. But it's really a product of tyranny over the mind of men, right? A great quote from Thomas Jefferson. That's what this is about. Ignoring the consent of the governed, not seeking the consent of the governed. That's where government in our country is supposed to get its power. And using the power of government to make you submit through penalty, through jail time, through ostracization, and through cancel culture, right? And that's happening at the government level and in the corporate environment. And that's what's happening because it's very purposeful and it's powerful about making you submit to their belief system and not allow you to live freely in our federal system where we can agree to disagree about some of these issues, treat people with respect, do what we should do for freedom. I am a liberty-loving conservative. I want the government as far away from my business as possible, and I want that for every American, regardless of what you believe. But don't you dare tell me what I'm going to raise my kids to believe. Don't you dare take away the ability of me to protect my family with weapons and firearms. Don't give me the inability to go to the doctor of my choice. And don't prohibit me from being able to speak freely about my belief in God, and there is one man and one woman, and that we should have a union of marriage, and that we should celebrate Western civilization. And that's what they're trying to do. All
right, let me get you on another topic, immigration. It's not kids in cages anymore. It's kids and containers. The Biden administration is trying to have it both ways. I don't think there's a single issue in front of the public right now, whether it's the demand on the power grid, the COVID relief bill, or anything else, whether or not they want to push for single-payer health care that cannot. We can't discuss these things without immigration. The Democrats want the open border. AOC and the far left, they want climate refugees to be their own new status now, which is pretty much the whole world. I want to know how the Democrats think that they could solve all of the problems that we have and take in the problems from around the world. We've got over 500,000 homeless American citizens. We've got power outages that happen whether in New York or Texas or California, they do happen. We have vaccines that are not getting out fast enough. We have kids who are still not going to school. And the Democrats are saying now would be a really great time to take in tens of millions of people who are going to need schooling, housing, health care, and plug into the energy grid. How do the Democrats plan to do this?
Well, they don't have a plan that's legitimate on how to do this. They basically want to do this, again, it's about power. And keep in mind, a few years ago, when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle were screaming kids in cages, I go to the border. My district is only about 100 miles from the border on its southwest edge. And so I spent a lot of time working with Border Patrol and talking to reporters and go down to the ground. I've spent the night down on the Rio Grande River. I've talked to immigrants coming across the river. You know, God bless these immigrants. I don't have any issue with what they want, and I know you don't either. The problem is you've got Democrats who, in the false name of compassion, allow open borders to be something that they say is good for immigrants and our country, and it is good for neither. We empower cartels to move human beings for profit. They get stuck in stash houses. They then use that to move fentanyl and dangerous drugs into our country. all while we're allowing other countries to exploit those weaknesses. Iran, China, and others drive things through our southern border. And they do this again, saying that they're the people who are, there for brown people around the world, and that they're there and they're the ones that are enlightened, and that we are bigots because we believe in a secure border. I think it's the opposite. Talk to the Hispanic community in Texas who are now moving right and supported the president's agenda. The president was as strong on the border as any president in my lifetime or before, and Hispanics rallied to support Donald Trump. The Border Patrol community is heavily made up of the Hispanic community. This is all about race in the eyes of my Democratic colleagues, and now they're getting theirs, because now they're seeing, wait, we've got people at the border. What are we going to do with these kids? You can't just release them to some dude who claims to be the kid's uncle. You've got to protect the child. And it's a environment that was created by a leftist agenda that says there are open borders, encouraging caravans to come up through Mexico and come here. And Biden, through his executive orders and getting rid of Title 42, getting rid of the return to Mexico policies, cutting the budget for ICE, and stopping building the fence. He's harming the ability of us to secure the border, endangering those children, endangering those lives, creating a crisis at the border, and now he's going to have to live with it while AOC and the left are carping from his left.
All right, so let's bring it all together. Last question, last topic. We got to make this one quick. Mitt Romney has come out and said that he thinks if Donald Trump runs again, he's going to win the Republican nomination, although he won't support him. Many of your colleagues, including yourself, have kind of changed views on Liz Cheney. So going forward, is the establishment going to get their way, or is the base going to get their way?
Look, this is a country that is, I think, strongly committed across the ideological spectrum, other than the radical left, to the agenda that President Trump was driving. Pro-America, America first, strong border security, stand with Israel, stand up against Iran, fight China, make sure we got a strong economy, low regulations, low taxes, create economic growth, protect life, have good judges. You couldn't have asked for a better 4 years, and the left exploited the pandemic. They politicized the pandemic. They exploited laws in order to try to make sure that they can move to get the election in November. The American people want us to have an agenda like we had those 4 years. We should stop have this back and forth about the personal nature of attacking President Trump. And Liz Cheney, I took issue with her yesterday because I think she made a terrible mistake the day before in coming out and gratuitously taking a shot at the president. And look, I stood with Liz a month ago. I thought she had a right to express her opinion and have the ability to defend that vote in that position. And then 2 days ago, she takes a gratuitous swipe at the president, the former president, in a way that is completely at odds with the millions of Americans who are sick and tired of the swamp, sick and tired of the corporate elites and the cultural elites in Washington, that president stood with the American people against. And so I'm going to be standing up for that group and those people. We got time for politics to play out. Donald Trump would be in the mix, Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, others. Let's get through 2022 built around a strong agenda, unite, beat the Democrats, and then let's pick our leader for 2024.
All right, Representative Chip Roy, thanks for joining us. We got to leave it there. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Sounds great. I really appreciate it. Take care.
All right, here we go. Time now for parting shots. And today's parting shot is a toy maker, Hasbro. Without any controversy or call from activists, they're getting rid of Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. Headline, Mr. No More. Mr. Potato Head goes gender neutral. Okay, I don't understand this. Is Hasbro going to change its name from Hasbro to Has-Sis, like CIS or SIS, maybe Has-Zim or Has-Zay or Has-Zir? I think some of these companies do this so nobody asks the question, where do you make the gender-neutral potato head? In China. Yeah. See, my kid got to see Mr. Potato Head and Mrs. Potato Head in the Toy Story franchise. I have to imagine if they're allowed to watch those movies in China, the kids got to see the toys they were making all this time. Again, there's no controversy here. And I hate to be sophomoric when I say this. It's just stupid. We're getting to the point of stupid. We can't even control ourselves anymore. I mean, are we going to get rid of Mr. Coffee and Mr. Peanut? This is just stupid. I know there should be bigger, more academic, more brainy words to use, but we're at a point now of just being stupid, and we can't help ourselves. Nobody is protesting outside of Hasbro. There's no fight to be had here. Nobody's waving a transgender flag in front of their factory. Well, they couldn't because it's in China. That's not the point. Even in the absence of a controversy, these corporations are racing into the arms of woke for absolutely no good reason. And it looks like now with the gender-neutral potato, which I'm sure is going to be a lot of fun to play with, it's never going to stop. Before I end this, just real quick, you can put the Mrs. Potato Head parts on the Mr. Potato Head if you wanted to. We're right. They're wrong. That's the end of the story. The arguments on this television program cannot be broken. Make sure you catch me on SiriusXM Patriot Channel 125, noon to 3 East, 9 to noon West. From Washington, D.C., I'm Andrew Wilkow. Thank you for watching Blaze TV.